Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. I'm Francis Seeley from the Enfield Climate Action Forum, or EnCaf, and this is one of the webinars that we've done where young people from EnCaf Youth and also the Enfield Youth Parliament interview MPs. Now, we've already interviewed two MPs, Kate Osamor from Edmonton and Feryal Clark from Enfield North, and today they're interviewing Bambos Charalambous, who is the MP for Southgate. Unfortunately, we couldn't show the video of it because the quality was quite bad. So we've turned it into an audio-only version that we'll put up here with a picture of all the people involved over it. But the interview is extremely good and the young people asked some really searching questions. So let's start with them introducing themselves.
So hi, my name is Bambos Charalambous. I am the Deputy Young Mayor for Enfield. I am the Chair of the Enfield Youth Parliament.
Hello, my name is Mustafa. I am the Deputy Chair for the Enfield Youth Parliament, and I'm glad that we are all here today.
Hello, I am James de Montbreville. I'm the Member of Youth Parliament for Enfield, and I'm happy to be here.
Bambos Charalambous, I'm the MP for Enfield Southgate.
So we're just going to start. We've got a couple of questions that we've put together for you. So I'll start with our first one. When did you realise climate change was an issue and that you really felt that you needed to do something about it?
It was when I was a student, so I was aware of it when I was at school, but it became really prominent when I was a student. I was a student in Liverpool and Manchester, and there were many more people involved in that in environmental issues when I was studying. So it goes back to 1991. So it's as far back as that.
So I think my question would be, I'm going to be very direct with it. Despite multiple violations on various international environmental agreements, do you still support the incinerator being built? And if you do, which factors caused you to, or which factors outweigh each other to come to the decision?
First of all, I think I hope there's a time when all incinerators can be scrapped, because I think they pollute the environment, they contribute to CO2 emissions, so they're not, we don't want to have them there if at all possible. The problem is how we dispose of our waste. And I think part of the problem is that the only two options are either we recycle more, which I'm a big fan of, and we need to push that forward, or we landfill. And unless we're in a position where we can recycle more, then I think we have to get through as best we can. But you know, I'm not a fan of them, and I think there should come a time when we can scrap all of them, not just the one in Edmonton. But we're not there yet. Until something comes forward, until people are able to find a system whereby we can recycle far more, then I think all we can do is improve with what we've got there.
Just so I can clarify that really quickly, you are in current support of the incinerator until we can find a better option, yes?
Until we can get a better option to dispose of our waste, I want there to be a time we can get rid of all incinerators, but we're not there yet. Until that time, then unfortunately, we have to replace what's there. If people can come forward with other solutions, we're more than happy to entertain them and to support them. But unless we recycle everything, unless we put pressure on the people that make our waste so that we can't recycle it, then we have no other option than to either landfill or incinerate, and neither of them are ideal.
So moving on, just the construction of the incinerator is set to cost £1.2 billion, and this is double the original estimate, and it doesn't include any future operational costs. So that's a lot. So do you agree that the money of your constituents should be spent on at least investigating green alternatives and potentially educating constituents on recycling, as it is a fact that half of the rubbish that's pending incineration could actually be recycled?
Yeah, I think we should have more investment in looking at alternatives to incinerators, and people should recycle more. But I think the difficulty is this is actually looking at it the wrong way around, because you have the 7 boroughs form the North London Waste Authority, so their job by definition is to get rid of waste. And I think if there was more effort put into actually focusing more on recycling and putting the emphasis on that rather than collecting waste and distributing, getting rid of it, then I think that would be far better. So yeah, I'm very happy to support more efforts to go into recycling. We don't recycle anywhere near enough in this country, and I think we should explore all other options. I think incineration is one of the worst options, but it's the least worst of all the other ones at the moment, other than recycling. So yes, we do need to look at recycling.
I'm really glad to hear that you support recycling, and I think one of the biggest issues with why people don't recycle is because they're not aware of it, particularly younger generations. So would you then agree that recycling?
Absolutely. I think I think it is partly our own individual responsibility as well, but I also think it's the responsibility of the manufacturers of the products that we use, whether it's in supermarkets, whether it's the clothes that we wear, whether it's anything we consume. I think there's also an onus on them to make things that are recyclable, and I do feel that we can do more to put pressure on the big manufacturers who, after all, they make huge profits from the sales they make to us to actually source recyclable products. But yes, we do need to educate people. We need to get them thinking about getting away from waste, to limit the waste that people produce, and to recycle far more.
I just want to pull your attention away from the incinerator and to the environment in general. So whilst Enfield Southgate is currently one of the furthest sub-boroughs away from the incinerator, the A406 still cuts in through Southgate. Do you believe that the current and future climate aspirations held by either the Conservative or ULEZ zones, whilst being able to keep poorer families who cannot afford cars that fit in the ULEZ criteria, to not pay heavy tax travelling 2 jobs and back to their house?
So, really good question. So, I mean, when people say we found these new cars that are going to be electric cars or hybrids that are going to reduce emissions, there's also a cost in actually purchasing them, but also in the manufacture. And manufacturing some of those vehicles might be just as harmful for the environment as actually carry on with your old one, because the money you save from being more efficient in the car you use, if you're that wealthy, you'll spend on other things which might also be detrimental to the environment. There is an impact on people who can't afford to upgrade to vehicles that are less harmful, that are hybrids that reduce their emissions. And I think that there should be, we should encourage less car use anyway. So where possible, we should be looking at walking, at cycling, to using public transport. And I think we should have more investment in those areas. But where it's absolutely necessary, then I think there should be either some sort of exchange for your old vehicles, so you actually get some money back for distributing for getting rid of your polluting vehicle, that you can use towards getting a more efficient vehicle, but maybe that can be done gradually. But my preferred option is less car use, more reliance on other forms of transport. But once again, it will show that people who are poorer are massively disadvantaged.
Thank you. So do you agree that there's a direct correlation between the incinerator's placement and the ethnicity and separately economic disadvantages that the majority of the surrounding residents face?
It's a bit chicken and egg. So the incinerator's been there for, I don't know, 50, 60 years, something like that. And some of the properties that were built in Edmonton, I mean, the area that's the incinerator in was classified as an industrial estate. So there shouldn't have been too many properties around there to start off with. But we're now in a situation where space is so tight for accommodation. There's a proposal for building on Meridian Water, which is right next to the incinerator. So I think it's it is a problem that people will be adversely affected who live close to the incinerator. But there are other incinerators. There's one in Bexley, there's one in Lewisham, there's one near Millwall's Ground, and they're all on. Well, the one in Millwall's Ground was on. The next to Millwall's Ground was on industrial estate land to start off with. So it's whether the housing has been the result of the building of housing on industrial land has been the issue, or whether it's the other way around. But in any event, it doesn't matter, because it's still going to adversely affect anybody who lives local to it, and that's got to be the bottom line. And it tends to be people who are poorer, who live closer to incinerators, because if you're wealthy, you've got more choice to where you can live, and the property is cheaper. And unfortunately, we live in a country where people who are poorer tend to, particularly in London, tend to be from ethnic minority backgrounds. So it does have an adverse effect, and we shouldn't be citing incinerators anywhere near high density populations.
So leading on from that, DEFRA, which is the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, says that there is, quote, increasing evidence that particulate matter, which is in the emissions, leads to respiratory and cardiovascular problems, and these, of course, can be fatal. And considering, as we've just discussed, the increasing amount of people who are living close to the incinerator over time, as such, in your capacity as an MP, what have you done to stop, or at the very least mitigate, the evidently harmful effects this incinerator has had and will continue to have on the public health of constituents?
To start off with, it's not just the incinerator that's harmful for the environment. It's also cars and the emissions from the vehicles. So the British Heart Foundation had an event in Parliament where they showed MPs how harmful the CO2 emissions were, or the particulates that were being emitted in the atmosphere were to their residents. I think Enfield Southgate was in the top 60 constituencies, was number 60 of constituencies where there were harmful effects felt. Now, clearly, we need to change people's attitudes, get cleaner and better technology to reduce those emissions until the emissions are totally gone. And it's been quite telling that people have noticed the skies have been clearer during lockdown, during the pandemic, and we've seen emissions fall in that time. So it shows what can be achieved if we put our mind to it. So I think looking at, in relation to the incinerator, if you're going to have one, you need to have one that's isn't emitting so much CO2 into the atmosphere, so many particulates, and ideally none at all. In relation to car use, we should restrict or limit car use as much as possible and find alternatives to that, and also rely on technology that makes it cleaner and more efficient. So eventually we have vehicles that don't emit emissions at all, but we need to do that as soon as possible.
Yeah, and just going back to my question, I completely agree with you, but I was just mainly asking, up until now, what have you done as an MP to mitigate against the effects or speak out against the incinerator? Have you done things such as that?
I've taken part in a debate. So there was a debate that I think it was Kate Osamor, actually. She had one about a year ago. So I participated in debates, and I responded to constituents' concerns. I've raised issues with North London Waste Authority about residents' concerns about the incinerator. And personally, I've changed my habits, so I make sure I walk and use my hands.
Okay, thank you.
Also, another question, slightly related to the incinerator and current pollution in London. I'm unaware. I'm not sure if you have seen the inquest into the death of 9-year-old Elekisi Deborah, I hope I'm saying that right, who died from asthma triggered by the current air pollution in London. In light of a case like this and possible future cases like this, from studies which show that in high pollution cities there is more cases of asthma within children born there, how is there still, is this factor outweighed by other factors? How are MPs still able to support the Edmonton incinerator expansion, which will, due to the size of it and an estimated 700,000 tons of CO2 emissions yearly estimated to be produced? How is there still?
Okay, well, let's unpick that. I mean, people die prematurely because of CO2 emissions every year. So it's and it is directly caused not just by incinerators, but also by cars and other emitters of the of CO2 emissions. So we need to look at that in the whole. So we need to make sure we're taking steps to reduce that, because it's not just harmful for 9-year-old girls. I mean, in my constituency, there's Bowes Primary School is on the North Circular Road. It's actually dangerous for the kids to play in the playground there. And they actually monitor the pollution on the North Circular Road. And sometimes if it goes above a certain level, they will not let the kids play in the playground. It's that dangerous to be there. So there's a responsibility on everybody to take steps to minimise the CO2 emissions. In relation to the incinerator, well, you have to ask yourself, as to say, I want to get rid of all incinerators. If we have to use them, then I'd be keen for the best technology we can that reduces emissions. So if there's something that's going to go there that's going to reduce the emissions that we currently have to a lower level, then that's got to be better. It's not ideal, but it's got to be better. It's like, I don't know if people smoke. If to use a cigarette as an example, if you have a cigarette that's high tar, and you move to a low tar cigarette, well, that's going to be slightly better. It will still kill you, but it will still be better for you. But the best solution is not to smoke at all. And that's where we want to get to. And at the moment, we're at the high tar option. And even if we go to a low tar one with a new incinerator, that won't be ideal, but it will be slightly better for you, but it will probably still kill you in the long run. So we need to get to a situation where we're not smoking at all.
Just so we can have a bit more insight into how the MPs decided, were these same issues looked at, cases like Ella Kitty Deborah and similar cases, when discussing whether the new incinerator should be built, or was it just a decision without looking at cases like this?
Well, first of all, I don't know what was discussed in the process about how the Northumberland Waste Authority came to their conclusion. Northumberland Waste Authority is a separate entity. It's made up of 7 boroughs. It has, I think, 2 councillors on it from each borough, and the final approval of any decision is made with the Secretary of State. Now, these approvals were made, I think the go-ahead was done before I was an MP by the Secretary of State. So I wasn't involved in that process at all. But clearly they have to take into consideration the harm that any incinerator will do to the local community. So I think that has to be a factor. But again, as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at this in the wrong way around. Is if the government are being driven by the need to get rid of waste as quickly as possible, and their criteria is that incinerators are the best way to do that, then you need to change that policy decision so that isn't the main focus of the government's view, because these waste authorities are set up by statute, so they're created by government to deliver what the government do. If you employ them to get rid of waste, then they will get rid of waste. And that's their only functioning as they were set out to do in law.
You voted in favour of a motion calling on the government to rebuild the economy so that it works in the interest of the many, not just handing out rewards to those at the top, and to bring forward a green industrial revolution to decarbonise the economy and boost economic growth. Though the incinerator may be boosting the economy, it's certainly not decarbonising it. What is your reasoning for saying this, please?
Again, I mean, one of the things that we're keen for is for there to be a green economy. So it's about sustainable energy. It's about sort of retrofitting houses. So it's looking at all those things. I want us to be in a position where we don't have to. I prefer the incinerator jobs to be all jobs in recycling. But until you create the technology to do that, until you're able to completely replace that, then you won't be able to move forward. And I think also just the idea that growth is a measure about how good an economy is also slightly flawed, because if you're based in an economic model on consumption, on having more of everything, then that will lead to more waste being produced. And if that waste isn't recyclable, then you're going to be just creating more and more CO2 emissions if you can't get rid of it through recycling. So people said when the death penalty was abolished in the UK that you'd put the people that were carrying out the hangings out of jobs. It's like, well, I'd be very pleased to put them out of work, because that way, it's they're not committing this heinous act, but they could be redeployed elsewhere. So I want us to get into a position where we don't need to use incinerators anymore, and those jobs, to use the phrase, recycled into other greener industries.
So just moving on, before I do start my next question, I was just wanting to ask you, would you agree that the North London Waste Authority, I believe that's what their full name is, aren't in fact very receptive? Because we've heard from a couple of MPs before that they've raised objections, and it seems to sort of no end. So would you agree that you mentioned how the new incinerator will essentially be more efficient and will reduce and will be emitting less emissions? However, there is no plan in the new incinerator for it to include carbon capture technology. So it won't in fact be better to that much of a great extent. So would you actually say that A, the North London Waste Authority are not receptive, and B, the new incinerator will not change emissions to that much of a great extent?
Well, the North London Waste Authority, I can only go on my experience. So they've responded to things that I've asked them to respond to on behalf of constituents when I've raised concerns. But then I am an MP, and I don't know what their response is like to other residents who contact them directly. Having said that, I do know that this is something they were discussing for a very long time. So it may be that the reason they're not receptive is that they feel the decision's been made and they've already revisited some of the avenues. I'd be quite willing to ask questions and to get a greater understanding as to why things are the way that you say they are, why they can't produce more carbon capture, and why they've not considered various other aspects of it if those are still issues. So I'm more happy to follow that up. Because I think we need to make sure the technology that is there is the best that we can get, and that's we have emissions reduced to the absolute minimum.
Definitely.
If at all.
If you could follow that up, that would be really greatly appreciated. Now moving on to my main question. Labour's Green New Deal certainly extends climate change efforts past that of the Conservatives. However, it doesn't include education about the climate and recycling, etc. So two kind of aspects to this question. Firstly, what is your overall opinion of the Green New Deal? Do you support it? And secondly, do you believe that education should be added to it and implemented as well?
Yep, 100% support the Green New Deal. I think it's a good thing. I think it's the right way forward. I think we need to all take huge steps to lead a more sustainable life and look at having renewable energy, and make sure we will play our part in that. On the issue of education is absolutely essential, and it should be part and parcel. It should go hand in hand with the Green New Deal. I think it should pervade all aspects of our lives. I think we only have, from the phrase, there's no planet B, so we need to make sure that everything we do is with that focus in mind. I know there is some good stuff going on in schools already. I was contacted by First Farm Primary School, who were UNICEF ambassadors, and they were focusing on air pollution as one of their projects. So they contacted me, and I've got some people from UNICEF to speak to them in Parliament. So there is good stuff going on in schools already, but I think that should be standardised, and I think we should make sure that it goes through every school, and that.
So essentially, you agree that there should almost be a statutory requirement for education to be taught in relation to climate change and the environment?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't be able to move, without sort of hearing about the environment and about CO2 emissions and climate change, and the need to
That's
recycle
fantastic.
and
Thank
have
you.
sustainable energy. Yeah.
So my question will be related to an alternative or some sort of alternative that you did mention earlier in this interview. So currently there is a lack on incineration specifically. However, there is a current tax on landfills, such as the area that the new incinerator will be built. The Green Alliance has written a new white paper which outlines a variety of aspects that they believe should be changed to benefit, that would benefit us environmentally in some way or another. However, there's a specific bit which I picked out and I would like to ask your stance on it. And it's the introduction of a tax for incinerators in the UK, which would cost £75 per tonne of CO2 or CO2 equivalent, which would lead to an estimated 27 billion by 2030 if implemented as soon as possible in government revenue. What would be your stance on this? Would you support it?
Well, I'd like to look at it in more detail. It sounds a very interesting proposal, and obviously the ability to make tax policy myself would be, I don't think, going well with the Shadow Treasury team. But I do think we need to look at incentives which encourage people to get away from incineration and things that are harmful for the environment, and to reward things that are going to be far better for the environment. So, the government withdrew subsidies for solar panels in the past. So people were very irate. People had built business models to actually invest in solar panels. So, and that struck me as being, a very wrong-headed thing to do. So we need to be certainly encouraging far more people to look at renewables, look at sort of more investment in renewable energy, and rewarding things that are less harmful to the environment. And if that means putting taxes on things that are bad, that are polluting, then we should do that. Just as if you're paying for, to use a car as an example, if you're paying for a car that pollutes, then you pay more road tax than one that doesn't pollute. So I think the principle's already been established, and I think we should look at applying that across the board.
Thank you so much, Bambos, for joining us today for this interview. That concludes the interview. We don't have any more questions. Do you have any questions for us at all?
No, it's been a pleasure to speak to you, and I'm more than happy to do another one of these sessions with you again. But thank you for your time and for your very searching questions. You've certainly grilled me, so thank you again for your time.
Well, that was a very interesting interview. Bambos answered the questions well, and the young people asked very deep and penetrating questions. But there are 4 points that came out of that I think are worth following up. The first is about education. The Labour Party's climate change plan seems not to mention education and having climate change education in schools, and young people wanted that to be included in their policy. They felt education on climate change was absolutely important. So I hope that will be followed up. The second thing is about landfill and the fact that the system we have in the country at the moment favours incineration over landfill in the tax system. Landfill is taxed, but incineration is not. And many people argue, including the Green Alliance, that there should be a tax on the amount of carbon dioxide produced by incineration, a sort of carbon tax. And young people felt strongly that Bambos should take this up and also try and pursue the idea of having an equal playing field on this, because at the moment incineration is favoured over landfill. And the third point they talked about was new technologies, and particularly carbon capture. And they wondered whether the North London Waste Authority had considered carbon capture and the new technologies adequately, whether the incinerator has carbon capture technology with it. And also landfill. Landfill is also developing carbon capture ideas, and new technologies are emerging all the time where particularly carbon dioxide can be captured from landfill. And if that can be done successfully, that makes the argument for incineration much less potent. So they also wanted to follow up on that because they felt that was important. And the final point that was raised, and it was raised with the other two MPs as well, and that is incinerators tend to be placed in areas of deprivation where there are high numbers of communities from the ethnic minorities in this country. And it was felt in all the interviews that this did not reflect justice. And so that was argued. And I think the MPs tended to say, well, the incinerator was there before ethnic minorities came there, but it doesn't alter the problem that it's those communities that suffer the most. And the issue of justice has to be faced. So those issues were important. But I think the interview was very good. And I think the young people asked really excellent questions. And I hope Bambos and the other MPs will follow up on some of these issues because they're all important.